Well, hello everyone, it's Alex Tullio here, CEO of Financial Executive Women. Now, I am super excited about what we're about to do today. And you know I do get excited very easily, it's the Italian heritage. However, I've got two fabulous women here today and it's been a long time in the planning. We were originally going to talk together in person at our fabulous conference, which is coming, I promise. But in the interim, we thought, why not take the opportunity to have a fantastic conversation? And as you can see, we're actually here in carbon form. I'm so used to being in my studio behind a screen. So today is very special for a number of reasons. So as I always do, I'm going to introduce these fantastic ladies with their bio, and then we're going to get right in to what will promise to be a very organic and powerful conversation. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome the Honourable Bronnie Taylor MLC is the Minister for Mental Health, Regional Youth and Women. Appointed in March 2019, Bronnie brings a wealth of experience to this important and vital ministry. Before entering Parliament in 2015, Bronnie spent 20 years working in health as a registered nurse, specialising in cancer care and palliative care. Her work in these fields saw her become one of the first McGrath Foundation breast care nurses and then became the Director of Cancer Services in the Southern New South Wales Local Health District. It was through her work as a cancer nurse where Bronnie's political career began. Determined to get better services for patients in regional New South Wales, Bronnie successfully lobbied for local oncology service for the Monaro. The establishment of the Cooma Oncology Clinic means that regional patients have access to the same quality healthcare as patients in the city, and they can stay in their communities while having treatment. Inspired to make even more change, Bronnie entered local government, serving as the Deputy Mayor of the Cooma Monaro Shire. It was here that the National Party could see the passion and drive in Bronnie, and in 2015 she was elected in the New South Wales Legislative Council. Bronnie is passionately committed to our rural and regional communities, and in particular about health and education outcomes, local government and agriculture. As Minister for Mental Health, Regional Youth and Women, Bronnie is working towards ambitious targets toward zero suicides, providing more work opportunities for young people in regional New South Wales and supporting women with a number of programs building leadership and support networks. So much to talk about, Bronnie. Now, Licia Heath, it is so wonderful to have you here as well. So Licia has been on the show previously and we got her back in. So Licia is one inspiring woman also. After 19 years in financial services, Licia became so frustrated at the lack of women in politics that she decided to do something about it. As the CEO of for-purpose organisation Women for Election Australia, Licia is on a mission to inspire and equip women with the skills and confidence to run for office at the local, state and federal levels. Licia ran as an independent candidate in the high-profile Wentworth by-election in October 2018 and helped shape the political debate on a national platform. In addition, over the past 3 years, she's initiated and led the campaign to a new public high school in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Licia's experience of seeding and leading an issue-based campaign, her decision to run for public office and her role with the WFEA combined to show the positive effects of engaging in the political process in Australia. Licia's background includes 19 years in finance and asset management sector, and including, of course, at Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse in London and Australia, and she helped establish and is a shareholder of Australian-based asset management firm Ironbark Asset Management. So ladies, there's so much there, and I've cut your bios down because you've done so much. So as all our lovely community know, I love to say, right, formal bio. Now let's get into the conversation in your own words. So first of all, Minister, and I know you did say that I could call you Bronnie, so thank you. So Bronnie, I'd love to get a bit more from you about your journey to this moment, because there's so much passion there, your rural and regional commitment, your background as a nurse, you, I think, call yourself the accidental activist. So tell us a bit about your journey, wherever you like to start and finish, and what's led you to this point.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's always so weird listening to your bio, isn't it? You sit there and you just think, oh. So look, for a bit of context, I guess, my father worked for Qantas. So we moved around the world a lot. And so I never really had that sense of sort of community or sense of family in terms of my growing up. So when we moved out to where my husband had grown up onto his family farm, I just loved that sense of community. So I think that was something that really drove me subconsciously, and the fact that I sort of hadn't had that growing up. I mean, I had a fantastic growing up, but it was just different. So I think for me, I really threw myself into the community when I got there, and I'd worked in metro places in Sydney. I had a real interest in cancer and palliative care. And then for me, it was just really obvious that my patients didn't get the same outcomes as my city patients because they didn't have the same choices. So I think a really staggering moment for me was when I was nursing a lady who'd been diagnosed with cancer. And we knew that for her, the best sort of what we call as, her model of care would be to have conserving breast surgery, so a lumpectomy, and then followed by chemotherapy and radiotherapy. But because there was a lot going on at the farm at the moment and she didn't want to have to travel to have the chemotherapy and then the radiotherapy, she chose to have a radical mastectomy. And that's pretty hard surgery, right? Like, it's aggressive surgery. It's, you lose your breast. That's a really big thing. And I just thought, this is so wrong, because I knew we could never do radiotherapy in Cooma, right? Because that just wouldn't be viable or feasible. But I knew that we could do chemotherapy, and I knew we could do it safely, and I knew that it would make such a difference for the patients that I treated. I had a really amazing group of patients at the time, and they just said, well, why don't we have one Bronnie? And I said, well, because our service said no. And they said, well, that's no reason. And so then I became involved with a really amazing group of women called the Monero Committee for Cancer Research, and they were fundraisers, and they'd fundraise for equipment and things at the hospital. And then they said, well, Bronnie, what do we really need? And I said, well, we really need an oncology service. So that just started for me. So we did a big Coomer's Dancing with the Stars, and I was Sonia Kruger. And I know, hard to believe, I'm true.
No, I'm loving it.
And it was hilarious. And so we have a population, like catchment-wise, where I live, of about 12,000 people. And that committee's raised in excess of $1 million over, a long time. So it's pretty amazing. Anyway, we got the oncology service up and running, and it's still there today, and it's been really successful. And it just makes a difference to people for their lives. And so that was all I really wanted to do. And had no interest in politics. I'd never been a member of a political family. I grew up overseas, so I didn't grow up with politics. And I didn't grow up with my parents talking about it. Like, we'd talk about politics in the Philippines and Marcos and things like that, but we wouldn't talk about Australia. But I think I sparked a bit of an interest because where I live is a marginal seat. So it was always quite interesting because, come election time, you could pitch really good things that you wanted. And so then I got tapped on the shoulder by another woman in the National Party, and that's how it sort of started for me. So, I think a really typical sort of story of thinking, look, I'm really not that interested in this. I don't think it's for me. And then sort of having someone take an interest in me and actually think that I had a valuable contribution to make. And here we are. So I feel very fortunate, very, I've been lucky. I've worked hard, but I've put my hand up when the opportunity's presented itself. And that's, I think, what is really important for women to do as well, is because often we don't, right? We have demonstrated evidence that says that we think, oh, I better do that extra course, or I'm not
so
quite.
True.
Yeah. So I just say, no, put your hand up and have a go, and anything can happen.
I love this. There's so many. We're going to run out of time. I'm telling you already, this is going to go fast, and it will run out of time.
And wind me up too if I'm going too long.
We're not winding you up at all.
We're going. I reckon we can talk.
You two can, and that's why I'm so excited, because there's so much already in just sharing that bit of your story. And it is so weird hearing someone else read out your bio. Like, it's this weird thing, but it's great context for everyone. But so that journey, I want to talk to you a bit more about when someone tapped you on the shoulder, because I think just in that itself, it's so true, I think, for women more than men, that we often can't see what others can see in us, right? And as all our lovely community know, I reckon nearly every guest we've had on that's a woman talks about some version of imposter syndrome. Sometimes different words, but there's this piece of doubt. So I feel when someone else says, no, you can do this, you've sometimes just got to trust, if they're a trusted person, and jump in, put your hand up, take the opportunity. So I want to come back to, because you've beautifully undersold all the work that you do, and from that point to this point. So we're going to come back to that. But Licia, I love your journey as well, because as we described in your bio, deep financial services, completely different background. Bronnie, you kind of say, well, I never really planned to be in politics, and you shared something similar when we first spoke about how have you ended up doing the work that you do, and that path from corporate to actually know that's kind of not for me anymore, and then here you are. So give us a bit of your narrative.
It's a bit colourful. Look, I loved my funds management career, and it was a very fruitful career. But I knew, I turned 40, I had 2 young kids. Did I want to be doing the same thing in 15 years' time? And that was clear to me that I didn't, without necessarily knowing exactly what I wanted to do. But what I did, I had a wonderful conversation with my boss at the time. I would like to take a year's sabbatical. And that happened in 2017, and I set myself the task. I had a whiteboard in my office about how to solve or improve Australia's political landscape. That was the little problem that I gave myself. And I had a pen, and that next 12 months I set about trying to work it out. So I spent that year, I met with politicians, I met with lobbyists, I met with think tanks and policy researchers, staff, everyone in the zoo. Everyone was so willing to give me time as well. Can I buy you a coffee? I'd like to spitball some ideas. And I came, because I was so frustrated about what to me seemed to be not enough movement on policy. There just, at a federal sense, there just didn't seem to be enough execution on policy. So was it a shortage of policy research? No, it didn't seem to be. Was it, so why, so it's a problem of implementation. Okay, so let's have a look at that. And the conclusion I got to was there was just too little of what I would say, like Bronnie's experience, lived experience in our parliaments. And again, I'm focusing on federal there. So too many of the coming up through the staffer ranks, not having broad lived experience. So then I set about, well, what organisations are looking to fix this? And I found Women for Election Australia, and I was an attendee at their first ever conference. I was a punter in the stands in 2017, which was in New South Wales Parliament House. 5 months later, I was on the board. And then, I was intimately a part of setting the 3-year strategy for the organisation, putting together the training events, and hearing the messages over and over and over and over again. And I thought maybe one day I did want to run, but I was gathering information, and then in my own seat, there came this crisis-opportunity, we'll call it, opportunity out of crisis, when my local member, Malcolm Turnbull, who was also the Prime Minister at the time, stepped down. And I stepped forward and decided to run, and I'm crystal clear that I would not have done that had I not heard the messages of being part of those courses for the year before. And through that campaign, I had so many women approach me saying, keep going, you seem just like me, can I buy you a coffee at the end of this? Because I think I'd like to do the same thing one day, but I've got no idea where to start. And at the end of that campaign, which was one of the most positive experiences of my life, I went back to the board and said, look, we're playing down here, we could be playing up here. We need an inaugural CEO. I'd like to be that person, and I want to take us from here to there because I think the demand is there. And and it's nearly 2 years later. So that's my uncharted bio.
I love an uncharted bio. So there's some interesting things here that I think are really important to explore, and we had this great in-depth conversation before we started rolling the film, which is always the way. So there's some big topics that I want to talk about with you both, but I think there's also, so what is it? One, what's the hesitation? Why aren't there more women? So why aren't there more women in politics at every level? And I think, Bronnie, given that you do have this lived experience and you did step into the breach, and you stepped into the breach as well, Licia, how hard's that been? I mean, what are the challenges there? Because it's a public role, like for you especially, and you were sharing before, kind of everything's on the table, which, that's not what most people have to live with, that scrutiny, right? And I think, we were both also, we've already touched on the hesitation, women feeling a bit kind of imposter syndrome, can I do it? Is it really me? I don't know, I'm putting myself out there. Like, there are all these things that we say to ourselves that I think can be quite confronting around identity and actually having a voice and using our voice and putting ourselves out there. So as women who are doing and have achieved so much, I mean, What's been some of those challenging moments? Like, have you ever gone, gosh, why am I doing this? I'm putting myself out there. And she says to me, gosh, give me a day when I haven't. But, you know, what are some of those, like, how do you work through those moments when it might be a lack of confidence or someone attacking you or asking you to show up the way they want you to show up that doesn't feel authentic to you? Like, I know there's a lot to this, but I'd love, you know, for us to have a conversation about this. I think it's important.
Yeah. I suppose for me, just to be really honest, I was so naive. Like, I was seriously green when I came in because I hadn't been part of a process or part of a political party. And people like from Labor will actually say, Bronnie's really unusual for the upper house. Like, you know, when you do panels together, they'll actually say that. For me too, I think you do doubt yourself. For me, I had a patient at the time who had pancreatic cancer who was a really kick-ass countrywoman who had done a heap of policy work federally on the wild dog problem, and, like, you know, she just would take anything on. And she was the one, actually, every time I'd go into her house to do a nursing visit, she'd say, and she was really big in the National Party, which I didn't realise at the time because I wasn't interested or engaged. But then I found out, and she was the one that actually instigated for me to be tapped on the shoulder by another politician. I mean, here I am nursing the woman she died, right? And so I think for me it was that belief in me that she had and that other people had, and it was my husband. Like, I, you know, came home and told him and said, you're not going to freaking believe what's happened to me. But he said, well, why wouldn't you do it? And so that's been really big for me too. And I'm really, you know, fortunate that he has always pushed me as well. But I think, you know, hand on heart, I had no idea about the scrutiny that would happen. So when I became a cabinet minister almost 2 years ago, the whole landscape in Parliament changed. So it was like this attack on my family. My brother-in-law's the federal member for Hume. He's the Minister for Energy. And Angus Taylor, and my husband's the youngest of 4 boys. He's number 3. And this relentless sort of attack on me because of who my family was, what my last name was, then an attack on my husband in a voluntary role that he had, where he's done this amazing thing and developed these university centres, all for free. He's done it. And that I found really difficult, and it obviously still is very raw with me. And I've never seen any other men attacked personally the way that I have been. And I think what was really difficult and has been and continues to be is that women from across political parties will say to me in Parliament, I think it's really crappy how they're doing this to you. So my budget estimates in my first year was actually all about my personal family interests and not about my portfolios. I got really important portfolios, right? Mental health, regional youth, women.
Just a small group of portfolios
just a small
there,
thing.
which,
but
you know.
3/4 of that time for questioning was taken up about, you know, my husband, my brother-in-law, my family. And so women would say to me, I can't believe they're doing this to you. And I just want you to know, Bronnie, that we think this is really wrong. My response to them is, well, why don't you do something about it? You know, I mean, I was called Hyacinth Bouquet from the moment I walked into the chamber by a member of the opposition. I presume because I'm a country woman, I've got blonde hair, I wear pearls a lot of the time, so I really like them. And so he had just decided that I was this type of personality, and no one called it out, right?
And then, how is that okay?
Exactly. And so when I would say that, and to people on my own side, and I'd walk out of the chamber and just think, that is so wrong. And no one stood up, no one did anything. And they said, oh, Bronnie, that's just politics. You know, and they'd slap me on the back, and then they'd all sort of be friends. And I sort of thought, well, actually, no, it's just really friggin' bad behaviour. Yeah. And then it's, you know, then people surprise you, and then you know, then there has been someone actually recently, not from my own party, who's really stuck up for me in the chamber when they've done that. So that I find really difficult. So I think that is a challenge for women, because I think that it's really difficult. And also too, I think for regional women, there's a real challenge because we're away from home a lot. And I think if you have a really, really busy job in the city, and Parliament's just ridiculous to go to midnight and things. I mean, what good happens after 7:30? What good decisions happen? But at least everyone can go home. So, like, you can go home and you can open the door and look at your daughter sleeping, or, you know, whereas we can't do that. And I think that is a challenge, and I'm not sure Licia would be so much better at how we overcome that than me, but you know, for me, there have been challenges and I was so naive, and I wonder if I had known, if my choices would have been a bit different, to be brutally honest. Yeah. But now I'm here, I take the privilege very seriously, and I think it's a moment in time where we've all got to stick together, and we've all got to make sure that we support the programs that Licia's so passionate about, because we need to drive that change, but we need women who really want to be there.
Yep.
And and they have to have their eyes open. I wish I'd done the course that you guys offer before I started.
Yeah. You know, and so yes, I want to get your take on this as well. And I think because I don't want to lose this, like, you listen to these stories and they're not new stories. And we were just talking earlier about it's not just politics, you know, it's raw in the political landscape at the moment, which I want to chat about, but it's across corporate, and there's this real, you kind of think, is there this watershed moment where we're actually calling out that this stuff isn't okay? So I know we were talking about that, about is this the point where we mobilise? So I do want to come back to some of these themes about, you know, we've got to have a voice to support each other. It's great that someone said to you behind the scenes, oh look, that's pretty bad, but we've got to stick together. So let's talk about that. Licia, from your perspective, I mean, hearing this, and obviously, you know, you live this and you see this as well, you know, do you think stories like Bronnie's, where you see women take all this scrutiny around their personal life, personal appearance, this does not happen to guys. Do you think this is part of the thing that where you're speaking to these amazing, talented women who are like, you know what, I do have a voice and I do feel passionate. What's the but? Is it, oh my God, I'm going to be away from home, I'm already so busy and so exhausted? Is it, I don't really want to put myself out there because I kind of see what happens? Like, is it all of that? And what are you seeing in your area at the moment around all this?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's helpful to what I call gild the lily in terms of the experience, and we don't do that in our workshops. So at least 50% of the women that come out of our training courses go, right, I am crystal clear, I don't want to run. But they are 100% committed to helping another woman run, because they know what their skill set is. Not everyone has to be the front of house. It takes a team to get somebody elected, and a team of many skills. So there's a role for everyone there. In terms of, you know, what's the but, it's interesting. Literally, it's fresh in my mind because we just had a training course last night, and one of the women said, I don't think I have a thick enough skin to enter into politics. And we came back to her and said, we think we need more people with less thick skins in public office. Like, so this you have to look like this in order to survive is in part of the problem.
Such a good point. Yeah, it's a really good point though.
Yeah, so the you know, you don't have a university degree, but you've been running an NGO for 15 years that's bettered your community. You're doing 9/10 of what a good political representative does already. You know, you're a regional woman that's been doing drought or flood fundraising for your community to make things better for them. You are so close to being that political representative already. You're head of the PNC, you run the local business chamber, you Surf Lifesaving Club, whatever it happens to be, you know, RFS. Those are the people that we want to inspire and equip to see you could have a life in public office. Everything you're doing now for the community is amazing. You're doing it pro bono, which is very noble, but it also keeps you very busy. What you could be doing is being at the leadership table and getting even better results for your community and getting paid as well. So this it's kind of turning it on its head, and the idea, you know, poured through research from overseas mostly, that shows what happens to legislative chambers, that could be Canberra, could be state, it could be councils, when you get gender parity in those chambers. And it moves from people saying behind the scenes, that's rough, shouldn't be happening, to the front calling it out. That critical mass of women in this case, or I like to call it lived experience, that critical mass in those chambers creates less adversarial environments. Sound good? more collaboration across party, and a greater diversity of, or greater breadth of policy discussions, because you have more people that have been in healthcare or had to seek childcare or had to go through the aged care system for their parents, or been on Centrelink, or had to travel on regional roads, or so with that breadth of experience comes a greater breadth of policy discussions and a greater breadth of policy solutions as well. And we desperately need that.
Oh, and we're all saying, hell yeah, what's it going to take? Because I think there's rising frustration, right, for everyone out there as well. Because I feel like, we have been talking about this, and again, let's talk about it now. So there's a lot happening in the landscape at the moment, right? And it is raw, and you were both so beautifully sharing. We were having a coffee down the other end of this beautiful boardroom table before, and we were talking about, it is raw. And we were talking about culture, and is it a tipping point, or is it kind of going to go, have its moment in where the public's really scrutinising these behaviours? And, Bronnie, you were saying, does this happen, in corporate and other industries? And Licia and I saying, unfortunately, yes, this is not confined to one industry or one thing. And we're talking about bad behaviours and misogyny and just things that you think, gosh, really, we're still having this conversation. How do we start to change, really change? Is it that women are rising up and going, you know what, I'm sick of this? I mean, Licia, you were sharing before, we kind of went, oh, well, with everything happening with the COVID, if your workshops, have you had numbers go down? And you're like, no, it is the opposite. And
it is the opposite.
Why?
Yeah.
So is it now that we've literally gone, you know what, enough's enough, I'm happy to be the pain in the butt. If that's what it has to be, I'm happy to now be, what is changing? And how are we going to get this cultural change? I know this is a big question, but we're all in it, right, in different angles. What's it going to take?
Well, more than one thing, but I am totally inspired by the fact that every training event we've run in the last 10 months is sold out. I've had to put on more training events in the last 3 months to cater for the demand, and even then they've sold out at a faster rate, and now I have a waiting list.
So this is women wanting to come to a training event
wanting to learn how to run for public office. Yep. So
have you picked up when you're saying, okay, what is going on with this now, this demand? What are these women saying to you? Are you picking up some trends?
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean, I've been doing my own reading about, global feminist movements over the last 100 years and what it takes for women to kind of get to that tipping point. And the biggest thing is that basically women get to a point where they go, it is so clear to me now that unless I get involved, it's not going to get better. And that's what I think's been happening in Australia in the last couple of months. The watching from the sidelines and watching, are you going to handle this? Are you going to handle it? Are you going to handle it? All right. If you're not going to handle it, I'm a crazy busy person, but I'm in. I'm here to make it better. But how do you make it better? That's not an easy question. So, the void we're trying to fill is find out information about the political process in Australia, how to run a campaign, how do preferences work, just shining a light, making transparent what is currently a very opaque process. And the more transparent you make it, the more people feel comfortable, particularly women, to step forward into it as well. So that increased engagement is what is going to make it better, certainly in my view, but there's more than one thing.
Oh, it's complex. Yeah. These things are absolutely complex because we're talking about behaviours and patriarchal systems and cultures and which is why there is no silver bullet to this conversation. That's right. And it's why just having quotas or whatever the thing is isn't going to fix. We're still having the same conversations. Bronnie, from your perspective, you're in the thick of this as well, and you were sharing before. It's raw because it's personal and it's upsetting. So from your perspective, you look at what's happening and what are you thinking in terms of what's happening, what the path out is? I'm really interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think as well, how people talk about an unconscious bias, is that the right terminology? I think there is a lot of that, and I think I've really seen that. I saw a really good example of that in our chamber, last week. But what I think's changed, and where I think the opportunity is that obviously we have to get programs like what you guys are doing, and it's really powerful. But and I'm not allowed to talk about what happens at Cabinet, but for the first time since I've sort of been in there, I can see, as Minister for Women, I will talk about things that are happening with women and what I think is important. People are really listening at the moment, and men, because the thing is that we've tried to do what we can as women. We've done all of these sorts of things, but we really need the men on board in terms of politics. Because I came from a very female-dominated workforce in health to a very male-dominated one. I don't think either is a good thing. Okay, I think you really do need more balance. But I think what's happening now is that everybody's listening. Everybody feels 2 feet, or women feel 2 feet taller, and I think it's about how we sort of jump on this opportunity in terms of the fact that it has to stay relevant, it has to stay in the forefront, and there has to be that sort of, often we talk about how we throw a lens over something, or we throw a lens over policy to have a focus that we must look at how it's going to affect our First Nations people. Well, I think too, it's my responsibility as the Minister for Women in New South Wales to make sure that we have that lens over all of our policy at the moment and over what we're doing to make sure that we can empower women to do that. But we've got some really great women there, and the Labor Party's got a very good story to tell in terms of they've got some really fabulous women, and look, they did that by quotas. But I've sat on both sides of the fence with quotas, and I'm very open about that, because I don't think it is one fix all, because I think too it's actually up to all women on all sides of politics to call things out. Yeah. And that certainly hasn't happened in my experience, and I think it's got to happen. And I think the question that you have to ask yourself, like those amazing women that'll come to me and say, we think this is out of line, or Bronnie, I've got a job to do, I've got to do this. I think they've actually got it. Why, even though in those groups there is 50% almost balance, but those women still don't feel that they can call out bad behaviour?
Why is that, do you think?
Yeah, so that I think is the really crucial question. Yeah. And I think that, again, it's that they don't want to think that they're doing the wrong thing, or that they're calling that out, or it's just politics. So I had this saying when I would do cancer education for community groups, that you can't let abnormal become normal. So you can't let that spot on your hand that isn't actually normal, but you know what, it's been there 3 months now and you're pretty friggin' used to it, so you're not going to get it checked. Or that lump in your breast and you're like, oh, it's a cyst and it's been there for a while. Abnormal can't be normal, and abnormal has become normal in workplaces. And as I talk to you guys that have corporate experience, I don't. I worked in the New South Wales public health system all my career. We need to make sure that is called out. And I know for me, when I did budget estimates and I was getting attacked, we have a really good story to tell in Department of Communities and Justice in New South Wales. We have 65% of senior positions are made up of women, and I think that's a great story to tell. And they were at the table with me during budget estimates, and one of them said to me afterwards, I just respect so much, she's a DepSec, which is a very senior position. She said, we just cannot believe the way you were just treated. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm so used to it now. I was just expecting it, and I just thought it was normal. And I think abnormal has really become normal. So we've got that opportunity, as Licia said, we've got to call it out. I call it out all the time, and I'm starting to remind people that I'm calling it out. And now they're nervous, right? Whereas they weren't nervous 12 months ago. So I think if we can, I always say this, if women can stick together, great things can happen. So we have to acknowledge, I think, which we have, this is a moment in time that might not come again. So we've got to get it right. And we've got to make sure that happens. And I believe they're really listening, and I'd like to believe that the intent is a noble one, but let's just park that and let's just accept that they're listening, and that we've got to take this opportunity now to do this and to call it out, and to not accept this culture in private or public life.
Yeah, we say there's 5 barriers typically for women that men don't experience when they're running for public office. 5 C's. Cash. So if you've already got a bit of a gender pay gap, and it takes money to run, then that's a barrier. Caring, whether it's childcare or caring for older parents. So if you're typically it's the woman stuck in one of those scenarios, less, time poor to run. Culture is another one. So that plays more into political culture or party culture. Candidate selection, again, in terms of pre-selection for major parties. The big C, confidence then as well. So that combining effect, when you asked before, why not stepping forward? Those are identified as the main barriers, which is what we try to address in our workshops. I've seen a couple of those almost get obliterated immediately based on what's happening in the landscape more recently. They've said, I'm willing to forgo that. I'm going to find the time. I'm going to make because there's this recognition that it won't get better. It won't get better unless I get involved. So in whatever level that happens to be, and it gives me a lot of hope. A lot of hope.
Yeah, I love you waving your hands around as well, Bronnie. Say something. I love it.
I think too, Licia makes such a powerful point too, and you made it sort of before, is that sometimes we think to make change we have to be a member of parliament or a member of a local government. You can make change wherever you are. If you join an organisation that has a bit of gender imbalance, you joining that organisation to have that voice and that seat at the table is actually going to change things. So I think whether it means that you're heading up a local organisation in your community, or you're kicking ass in your financial, executive positions, and you're here sitting around this table at Macquarie Bank, that's actually massive, because you can't be what you can't see, right? And it's stuff like that and women doing that's really important. So it shouldn't just be thought of that it has to happen because politicians are listening now. We've kicked that, and we need to make sure that we progress it, and it's up to women that are there now to make sure that happens. But you can lead in any way, and you lead by example, and that's what inspires people. If I hadn't been inspired by my patient and inspired by this other person, I never would be where I am. So we have a responsibility to each other every single day, every moment in time, to wrap each other around with a web of support and say, look, how can I help you? You did really well what you said just then, that was really fantastic, good for you. How good do we feel? Yeah. And we all have a responsibility, and I don't think we've done that very well, and I think we need to do better, and now is the time.
You're hearing this, right, everyone? I love this because I've got 40 questions here and I don't even need to look at my iPad. There is so much to this. So first of all, I just want to, what you've just said before also, Bronnie, about I kind of think the abnormals become normal. Like the minute you said that, and just that simple analogy of, the thing on your hand, yes, it's insidious, because then, you grow up, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose, Licia, you and I are probably similar in terms of our earlier corporate career. You grow up, and we were talking before, I feel like it was 100 years ago when I talk about the fact that I was one of the few female BDMs. Like, it wasn't 100 years ago. This is a great conversation. But the point is that you kind of look at how you come up through whatever the experience is. And I had great male mentors and great male bosses, and they were male bosses because there weren't really that many senior females. And I think when you're talking about the fact that we can't let the abnormal become normal, you get used to things. And it was interesting, I had a drink with one of our amazing advisory board members last night, and she's a very senior, extremely successful woman. And she's saying, you know what, I kind of got to the point where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to be the pain in the ass, because it's either be the pain in the ass or acquiesce. And hello. But you kind of, on one hand, I go, it shouldn't have to be that you're in that box of being the pain in the butt who keeps saying, no, not good enough, no, not good enough, no, not happy with that. But if you then go along the easy route, and some things aren't a big deal, but then it becomes so insidious. So I love that you're calling out, this stuff is abnormal. It is not okay. So that's, and women's voices together, I think, as well.
There's not a lot of us to go to, but it's really important, and that's how we make change. We have to become that, not moral compass isn't the word I can't think of. We just have to become that rod of testing, I think. And that's a great role that women can play. Well,
and you've both talked about, this is about also real role models. And jokes aside, I mean, the conversations like this that are unedited, that are real, because, and I should say for everyone, who's watching this, I mean, these two amazing women are hugely busy. Bronnie, I know you've had mega march, right? Not your words, but you have had a massive month. You're looking forward to seeing your family for Easter. You've made the time to be here, and that gives me goosebumps, really, because it's having these conversations that are so important, because I know that people watching are going to go, yes, I'm so inspired. Oh my God, you're so real. And yep, you know, so I think they're so important. It's real role models. You know, you've got to be able to see other people going, well, you know what? It's not always easy, but we're here and we keep showing up, and together we have, because I look at you two and go, wow, the legacy and the ripple effect of everything that you're doing and have done and yet to do. And you've both made the point also about you don't have to be in power. You don't have to be the CEO. And this is a lot with our community. We say, you know, it's not leadership from a positional power perspective. It's the small things. So it's support for another woman. It's being, as you said, we all need the team around us. Not everyone's front of house. You know, these things are hugely important. I thought you were going to say something in. And we're going to run out of time really, really fast. But I wanted to ask you, Bronnie, so we sort of glossed over it a bit before. Your portfolio, you've got some really important things in there. You know, mental health, regional youth, women, like they're all kind of big and complex. I wanted to ask you from when I met you, is there any intersectionality there that you see across those? And obviously your passion for regional women, are there common threads? Are there things where you go, wow, this is where these are really intersecting? That's a curiosity question. And also for both of you, we touched on a little bit, but you know, let's talk about women in the workforce and what's happening. COVID has really affected women, we know, more than men. You know, there's a lot of reasons for that. So I'd love to kind of round out our conversation about that. But I'm really curious. Like, you've got these really important portfolios. You know, zero suicide, I think, is one of your, like, I'd love to talk about mental health is so important.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of cross-section which I hadn't actually envisaged. There's a lot of cross-section between mental health and regional youth. So I have a regional youth task force, which is 18 young people that I go to for policy development and to test things. And, you know, one of their main pillars in their framework is mental health. Women has just, the women's portfolio has really just, you know, exploded. But I love being the Minister for Women, right? So I really wanted that job, and I didn't think I'd get it because I didn't think the Liberal Party would let it go, sort of thing. So I was really happy as a Nat to get that, because and I love doing things like this. Like, this is just really, because I'll leave out of here with so much soul food, you know, and it's energy. It gives you energy, right? Awesome. So there's so much connectivity between all of them. And look, I was at Kids Helpline yesterday, and do you know 70% of the young people that ring the Kids Helpline are girls? You know, I'm not surprised because we're such great communicators, but, you know, it's really interesting. So for me, see, I get that intersection all the time, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's really great for girls, but then we need to sort of look at why that's happening and what's going on. So I do have, there's a lot of intersection between the portfolios, and obviously I have a real focus on regional women because I think what COVID's done is it's given us this amazing opportunity, right?
Well, I wanted to ask you because, and I could be paraphrasing incorrectly, but I thought in the past, I read something that you'd mentioned that, you know, there's a whole perception, there used to be a perception about, well, I can't have a career, and you've probably said the same thing, Licia, I can't have a career if I'm living in rural or regional because it really limits me. And actually that was one of my questions. Yes, I got one in. But it was one of my questions about, is that changing? Has that changed with everything that's been happening with the pandemic? Are you seeing that's presenting more opportunities now?
Oh, yes.
Yay.
Like, it's so exciting. And what we've done in government is we've actually said, so, you know, in the public service, it's all done on grades, you're level 1, level 2, 11. So we've actually said now that those level 11 and level 12, which are those senior public servant roles, they have to be advertised now that they can be done out of Metro. And that's a huge change. And that was driven by John Barilaro to do that. And so what that means, because often what would happen is that they'd move jobs, but they'd move sort of the admin roles and things like that. Whereas now we're saying, no, senior positions. I think it's because people are comfortable on Zoom now, right? Like, look at you running freaking whole, like, conference things. And we never would have thought that. We used to talk about it, but we didn't do it. And I'm telling you, there is the most amazing bunch of highly skilled, highly educated, highly capable women out there in rural and regional New South Wales. Wales that have never had those opportunities. I've got a great friend of mine from school, so much smarter than I ever was, did all these things, blah, blah, married a country guy, just didn't have those opportunities in that sort of business sector. And now she's just pumping. She's like had this second career, and I think that can happen for women too, can't it? Like, you know, and we forget, right? Like as a nurse, I used to think, well, all I could do is be a nurse, but I learned to problem solve because give me a mucky wound and I had to heal it, right? So I'm a good problem solver. Well, I never knew that I was a good problem solver. I'm good at observing because I've been trained to observe, and that's very handy in Parliament. And so I think like you, when you're this gun financial executive person in Deutsche Bank and London and everything else, but then you've used those skills, right, to go and do something else. And that's where women are really good. We're really good at pivoting and doing those sorts of things. So I'm excited about what's to come now. I think there's a lot to be excited for women.
Oh, I totally agree. It is such a wonderful period, and that Overton window that we call, or that window right now, once in a generation, sounds dramatic. I don't think it is dramatic. It is once in a generation opportunity to make change from here. And I first met Bronnie because I went in and met with the Minister for Women, very nerve-wracking meeting. And the minute
you had me freaking nervous. I know what you're worried about.
This is awesome.
And then a follow-up meeting with the Minister for Local Government as well. And I talked about what we were doing and said, look, New South Wales, and I know you've got a national audience, but just for the women that are in New South Wales that are listening to this, New South Wales is the worst state in the country in terms of female representation on council, like by a considerable amount. We have more male-only councils in New South Wales than anywhere else in the country.
So some councils that are only men.
Only men.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. So, and then I pitched this idea to Bronnie and to Minister Shelley Hancock about help us get out into rural and regional New South Wales leading into the council elections, which are in September this year. Help us run workshops across the state to fizz up, or inspire and equip more women to consider running for local council. Yeah. And I could see Bronnie's going, right, yes, we are going to do this, and because she's from the regions, started her political career on council, and totally understands the pathway that can come from that. Same with Shelley Hancock, regional woman, started on council, now a minister as well. So these views about, you were a nurse, Shelley was a teacher. So this career that can go from here, extraordinary experience that our politics and policy needs, now both ministers in New South Wales government. And those women are everywhere across the state, across every state. But for a reason, but they've deselected moving into politics. Yep. For all the reasons that we know about. We're highly informed, I find, about the negatives about politics. So it's our role to shine a light on the positives. The fact that you were involved in this council chamber at this time meant that you got an oncology unit for your community. Now the media doesn't like to focus on those positive stories. I found, Bronnie, I don't know about you. But as soon as we can shine a light on all those positives, this innate purpose that women and men feel, but we're focusing on women today, that innate purpose, linking purpose with Parliament, saying you want to do stuff with your community. Biggest trick the devil ever played was saying you can't get stuff done in politics. Rubbish, garbage. That's exactly where the decisions happen, and we want you in there. And for council, you can have your fantastic financial services career, agricultural career, whatever it happens to be, and be a councillor as well. So you're not giving up one for the other. It's an enhancement. So I want standing room only in all of those events for all the New South Wales women that are watching this right now.
Yes, we're hearing this. And again, I love that why are we out of time? I knew this would happen, but I love that, you've both talked about something that we talk about a lot, which is transferable skills, being a problem solver, you know, and I think, you know, ladies, you know, we have so much, and I think sometimes it's the challenge of, it's kind of like the thing, you know, when I'm reading out your bios and you're both going, oh, this feels a bit weird, because we hate talking about ourselves and hearing someone else, and, you know, but I think sometimes you need someone else to go, let me articulate for you what your transferable skills are. Look, it took me so long in my career to go, oh, hang on, I don't need to actually know everything about the technical, like this is actually the thing that I bring. But so I know that a lot of you struggle with this, so this is why we're here, because we have skills that can transcend any industry. So I think that's awesome. Also, I do want to give a shout out to the guys, because we are talking about women very deliberately, but also we've also talked today about the importance of the people in your corner that surround you, whether it's husbands, partners, mates, mentors. There are amazing men that are deliberately part of this community, because if we're going to make change, we were talking about this before we started rolling, you know, it's not just about women, it's people who want to make change and have a voice together and having conversations like this that's going to get there. I'm going to let you both go. Before I do, what would you like to leave us with? Bronnie, is there something that you'd like to leave the audience with? And it can be anything. Is it something about your portfolios? Is it something around the Choose to Challenge theme for IWD this year? Whatever you like. What would you like to leave us with?
I guess for me, I just want to pick up on what Licia said as well, in that telling positive stories. Yeah. And I just say, yes, choose to challenge, but choose to also tell your story. Because by telling your story, you not only inspire others, but there are so many good things to tell. And sometimes I lose sight of it, you know, like with March, you lose sight of all the good stuff that you're able to do and what you're able to achieve. But I think we live in a moment in time with the media, and look, I'm very respectful. I think they're amazing. I have a daughter who is a journalist, and I know how passionately she feels about telling stories. But I think we've got a situation where we've had massive cuts in the media industry, and we don't have as many journalists, and they're not able to do that really investigative work that they always have done, is my observation. I hope and pray that we come to a point where all of those things are actually re-bolstered, because I think people haven't got time for the good stories because they're too busy trying to get out the headline or the what's happening, and the amount of times I've had to sort of correct non-factual things. And there used to be time, particularly in the regions, where we had great local radio, and, you know, we really looked to the ABC for that, because they would tell those really great stories about, you know, someone's therapy dog or something, but that made such a difference, and it makes you feel good inside. Which is important, but we've stopped that, and we're getting bombarded, and it's very divisive. So use your platforms for positive, good stories, for talking to inspiring people. And if I hope you go away with one thing today, is that Licia and I are very, you know, I'll speak for myself, I'm a very ordinary person that never thought I'd be able to do extraordinary things. But I had the gift of a great education. I had the gift of a father who just told me I could do anything, and I've got a great life partner. But let's all know that we can do anything, but tell those positive stories and listen to them, and shut out the rest of the stuff. Don't listen to it if you don't have to, and just keep focused and stay in your lane.
Amazing. Amazing. What about you, Licia? What do you want to leave us with?
Oh, look, it is that there are so many roles that, you know, it's not just one thing. So I like the term moral compass. We all know what our values are, and we have to be very diligent and forthright to know when the values have been crossed, and, you know, that's not acceptable to me, and have the shoulders back to be able to speak out about that when that happens. It's so much easier to speak out if you're flanked by a whole group of, in this case, women, or at least like-minded people that say, got your back when you speak out, and next time I'll speak out and you get my back. And, you know, that just creates a much easier environment to call out bad behaviour. But I think also, you know, we're dedicated to helping 2,000 women run for public office by 2022. Like, that is really what we are. We've got our shoulder to the wheel in terms of doing that at the moment. If you don't want to run, then that is absolutely fine. But let's culturally in Australia normalise how we talk about politics. So if you're at a barbecue with 12 people and the woman next to you goes, you know what, I think I'm going to give it a crack. I can picture 12 years ago somebody go, why would you do that? Maybe 2 years ago, why would you do that? It's toxic and stuff like that. When somebody says that in our environment, we say, you should go for it. How can I help? We need more people like you to do it. Just normalise and assist, and only good things will come.
I am so inspired by you, both of you. I felt like you were looking at me then going, if you don't want to run, that's fine.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. Who knows?
You need to run. You need to run.
Yeah.
Over there.
Who knows what will happen? There'll be a political revolution that started here, right here.
Imagine the ballot paper, how long it'll be if you have your way. We'll be needing the whole frigging board table.
Well, yes, let's do it. But thank you so much to both of you. Like, it is so great to have these conversations, and it's a commitment to be here. And I know you say that it is soul food for me as well. But it's another thing that you've got to fit in, and so we do so appreciate it. And for sharing, I think this is such a real conversation. This is the point, everyone. No one wants another show reel. So thank you both for joining, and I'm hoping this isn't the last time. Like, no promises, but I always like to have another episode. And you and I, Licia, we're going to do some collaborations. We've talked about it with all the work you're doing. We've got your perfect target market here. Everyone out there, ladies.
Standing room only at these events.
That's right. But look, thank you. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. We've had, we've talked about some big topics, and, we don't have a lot of time to get really deep into some things, but I think we've covered a lot of ground. So thank you very much to Minister Bronnie Taylor and, of course, Licia Heath. Thank you for joining us, ladies. And we'll see you again, hopefully. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you soon.